Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 53 of the reign of chaos. Let's do a quick recap before I'm sure you want to get me to the question of government funding. In 53 days, Donald Trump has traumatized literally millions of federal workers, demoralized them. They zig and zag. There was a court ruling today that said the probationary people that were fired have to be brought back. The question I ask is, beyond the harm it's done to these workers' lives who are being disrupted, who's ever going to want to come work for the federal government again? And as I've said before, these are not interchangeable coders the way Musk could fire people at Twitter and hire somebody from Google. This will have ramifications for as far as the eye can see. So that's what happened on federal workers. The president got hired because he said he was going to lower prices. Wrong. Prices are still going up. Food prices in particular are going up. And you now have, with these completely wrong-minded tariffs, price spikes that are going to go across the whole economy. We've seen steel and aluminum prices, it looks like jumps of 25%. And frankly, the Canadians pushing back, I understand they didn't start this challenge. Donald Trump did, not America, Donald Trump. And for a guy that said he's, I know he talked to the Business Roundtable recently, said things are going to be great. Well, the stock market has erased all the gains since Trump's election, down the last couple of minutes ago, at least another 300 points. And, as a former business guy that was in finance, in many of the markets it's going into the correction phase, which in plain English means the market believes we're headed to a recession. Even Trump has acknowledged a recession may come. Could you imagine what Republicans could say if this was the record of 53 days of a Democratic president? And then to add insult to injury, we have the situation of our alliances being tattered. I've told you before, my grandparents on my mom's side were Canadians, so it's a little personal when Donald Trump has declared such disrespect for Canada and taken our closest ally, millions of families who have families on both sides of the border, and destroyed America's reputation in Canada for the foreseeable future. We've seen our alliances like in Ukraine and all of NATO undermined, and that kind of on and off of aid, it's reprehensible. I mean, closer to home, I think about the fact that I've been a big advocate for commercial space projects, the kind of things that Elon Musk actually started. Well, the other day when Trump cut off the satellite pictures to Ukraine from a private commercial space company, Maxar, now it's gone back on, but cutting that off arbitrarily with a contract means that I don't think there'll be a foreign government or foreign company that will ever buy services from American commercial space if they can be manipulated by an American president on a whim. That's going to undercut our space industry, which is thriving in Virginia, could hurt us at Wallops on the Eastern Shore. So it's been a pretty horrendous first 53 days, I would believe, and don't take my word for it. The public is seeing what we've already seen in Virginia, and particularly in the DMV area, where I imagine the president's ratings are probably down in the low 30s or high 20s. Nationally, we're seeing he's already underwater, and I think probably as more Americans see the harm that's done, will say, we didn't hire this guy for this. We didn't hire this guy for unmitigated chaos. And that brings us to the issue at hand. And let me acknowledge on the front end that we've been presented with, two pretty awful options: a government shutdown or what's called a continuing resolution that will fund the government through September, but on very different terms than what had been agreed to earlier. On a government shutdown, we know there is a concern that you could have a Trump and Musk that would like a government shutdown and maybe never reopen the government or reopen only selective parts. On the continuing resolution, I will tell you, one of the reasons I'm amazed that Republican senators aren't standing up. They had no participation in that. So this was a MAGA group of far-right Republicans in the House who drove this, and nobody else had input. Traditionally, even in divided government, both teams have a little bit of say. And this continuing resolution is just awful. It dramatically cuts back veteran services. I was at the Veterans Clinic in Fredericksburg that opened about 10 days ago. Doesn't have enough staffing because who's going to work for the Veterans Administration if they're planning on firing 40,000 people? We've got a great new facility I've been working on for 10 years. Going to open up on the south side to help relieve some of the challenges at Hampton. I know they won't be able to hire enough people as well. I know the continuing resolution, because rarely are they ever done this kind of crazy process where we freeze spending, and this didn't freeze it, this cut back in select areas driven by Trump, is that our ship repair industry, which is critical to our national security, but critical to the economy in Hampton Roads, they are frozen if you have to rely upon last year's budget. The continuing resolution as well takes a gratuitous, mean-spirited shot at the District of Columbia. Cuts over $1 billion mid-year, even though every other continuing resolution over the years has never particularly picked on D.C. They get hit in terms of general cutback on federal spending, but not on the funding that goes to their cops and their teachers in Metro. And you cut back a bunch of cops, there's going to be more crime in the DMV region. You have this kind of cut, you're going to have cutbacks at Metro. And the list goes on. In fact, the CR in many ways would be an endorsement of the Trump-Musk agenda. So I am voting no on the continuing resolution. I'm voting no on the motion to proceed. I am voting no even if we get an amendment that gives us a 30-day, unless we get the 30-day extension passed, which would require 13 Republicans. I'm not sure we're going to get that. But let me also quickly add that I understand, and we had quite a spirited Democratic caucus today, that there'll be a number of Democratic senators that are voting yes. I understand that. I understand their concerns. I'm not going to criticize their decision. But what I have heard from Virginians of every stripe, particularly our federal workforce, is you need to stand up against this, in many ways, unlawful activity. This random firing, terrorizing of our workforce, which so far, at least, virtually every court has ruled against. Final comment I make before we take questions is, regardless of what happens tomorrow, this is going to continue to be a rocky period. And if Virginians and Americans don't like this, they need to remember who's responsible. I pride myself on not being a terribly partisan guy, but I have never seen a time when everything is controlled not by a traditional Republican Party, but by Trump and his extremists. And we so desperately need Republicans in the Senate. We only need 4 to stand up. I don't ask them to change parties. I just ask them to find the courage to vote for what you know is right and to not allow this power grab, unconstitutional power grab, to continue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura and be happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thanks a lot for joining us. As you well know yourself, you've been a longtime opponent of government shutdowns. You've spoken very vocally about that over the years. This is the first time that I can recall all Virginia senators and Maryland senators taking this position. What would you say to federal workers who worry about the fact that if there were a shutdown, they saw what happened in 2018 and 2019 when, under the first Trump administration, there was the longest shutdown ever, about concerns that something along those lines could happen again?
Well, Mitchell, that's a fair concern, and I think it's, again, unprecedented that the 4 senators in the region are going to vote no on this. But that is because, one, thank God, after that long-term first Trump shutdown, we put in place a law that says you get back pay. So our federal workforce, even in the event of a shutdown, will receive back pay. One of the reasons why a shutdown is stupid, because they're not cost savings. But one of the things that has driven me as much as as anything is just how many federal workers, federal employee unions, frankly, businesses in the region. I was with a number of government contractors last night. They felt this CR was so bad that they all urged me to vote no. Now, I'm sure there are others, and we'll see again how many Democratic senators end up voting for the CR. But I think it's time to say, particularly with this unlawful power grab that takes place in the so-called continuing resolution, to say enough. Now, the truth is, whether you have the CR or whether you have the shutdown, will Trump obey any of these rules? And this is why, again, I appeal to folks around the Commonwealth. I don't care what political party you belong to, but we need to hear your voices. We particularly need to hear the voices of Republican local elected officials. I'd love to hear from folks in Hampton Roads, elected officials who are concerned about if the CR was to take place, the long-term effect that'll have on ship repair. I'd love to hear from some of the state legislators in rural Virginia where we had major economic development projects I worked on with the governor, where now that funding is frozen. Step up, because this idea, and I say this to my business community friends, the idea if you simply keep your head low and maybe they won't notice you, well, how's that worked out for the business community so far with these non-thought through tariffs, where this guy in 53 days has managed to make mad our best business partners, pissed off all of our military allies, and probably put America in a more isolated position than anything post-World War II. Pretty awful.
Hi there. Are there any updates on the state's request for a disaster declaration for the recent flood and the delivery of disaster relief from Helene? And when can we say that both of these are late?
Well, let's take the recent flooding. I saw the pictures, but what really struck me was that folks like in Buchanan County were saying the flooding was worse than 77 flood when the town flooded. And it's awful that Trump hasn't declared a disaster declaration for those communities hard hit. These were communities that voted 70, 75% for Donald Trump. And he doesn't even have the concern or care to designate these communities. Now, if something's happened in the last 12 hours, I will stand corrected. But as of a day or so ago, they had not been designated. It's interesting enough that communities in adjacent states had been declared. And I don't know how, you don't say it's late at this period of time, because those communities, I think about the little town of Hurley, there was a bad flood in the first couple of days of my governorship. I took George Allen down. He was then sitting senator down to that community and saw the disaster there. This community gets walloped every once in a while. I don't know why or how or what excuse the administration has for not declaring these communities a disaster area. In terms of Helene, we're still uncertain. I mean, we did very well. I mean, a lot of money to rebuild the Creeper Trail, lots of money in terms of the Blue Ridge Parkway, appropriate efforts in like Pulaski County and elsewhere. And a lot of this, the local communities go out and spend money and then it gets reimbursed. And there's a hell of a lot of concern whether these reimbursements will be met. And we've been trying to get clarity. I also asked my friends in North Carolina. They got 2 Republican senators there. I figured they might have more clarity. And there is huge unease. This is rule by chaos. And the communities that are the hardest hit in Southwest Virginia, again, areas where Trump overwhelmingly won, are being treated with disdain, disrespect. And if these funds don't arrive, it's one, illegal because Congress passed this, but 2, it reflects what Trump actually feels about a lot of these rural communities.
Senator, we're going to jump back to Courtney Mavis with Virginia Business.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Courtney?
How you doing? Thanks for, yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was muted. Thanks for taking my call, Senator. I wanted to go back to a question I asked about 5 weeks ago now. Now that the NTSB report is out related to the January 29th crash at Richmond Airport, I was wondering if, your feelings have changed at all. I know you had been very vocal against adding flights at the airport, and if you feel that the restrictions on the helicopter flights that they're now kind of keeping permanent, if you feel like those are enough, if there
Well, listen,
are
I think
other safety measures put
Yes,
in place, or if you have any lingering concerns about the FAA cuts and training for air traffic controllers at Reagan National.
Well, I'm glad to see that the helicopter routes are going to be changed. I mean, as somebody who lives close to Nashville and flies in and out regularly, it always seems weird that they would go right down on the in fact, north side of the river with flights coming in. That's a step in the right direction. But am I still concerned? Absolutely. Tim Kaine and I and the whole regional delegation said that the main runway, which is the busiest runway in America, was already at bursting its seams. And then a bunch of senators and congressmen say, well, we want a more convenient flight. And I think I believe there still exists risks, and I don't think the NTSB has finally weighed in yet on capacity limitations. Am I concerned about FAA cuts and air traffic controller shortages? Absolutely. The thing that's remarkable is we have had the safest airspace in the world. As a matter of fact, last year I believe we got through without a single fatality. We've had a couple of accidents now. We've had a number of near misses. And, I'm not saying there's causation here, but when we're already 3,000 air traffic controllers short, when we're already looking at FAA firings, when we already look at the fact that there's a government shutdown, people who were in the air traffic controller classes have to go back and start over again. It's outrageous. And, I think the public is worried. The only thing that and this wouldn't affect national so much, but I've had a number of friends who have flown back from Europe in the last week or so, and they say the planes coming back from Europe are virtually empty because tourists aren't coming to America now. Who wants to come to an America that bashes our longtime Democratic allies and sides with Russia? I think businesses are not coming over because who wants to do business dealings here when there's no certainty? So there may be a little less congestion at our international gateway airports, but I'm still very concerned at national.
Senator, our next question is Mike Gooding with 13 News Now. Mike? Okay, we're going to jump to Bill Atkinson with the Petersburg Progress Index.
Good afternoon, Senator. In spite of the political conditions, it's always good to speak with you.
Thank you, Bill.
My question, today is the deadline for the next wave of mass layoffs for the administration. Communities like the Petersburg area that rely so heavily on places like Fort Gregg Adams and Bellwood continue to hold their breath about these potential risks. Given the California judge's ruling today, and knowing that any court ruling such as this will likely wind up in front of the Supreme Court, do you think that the ruling can offer, or this ruling or any other rulings can offer any peace of mind for the local civilian workforce that hopefully a mutual beneficial resolution can be reached, or do you think the White House is just unwilling to address any resolution?
Listen, I think this White House, and Musk in particular, has taken a chainsaw to our government. I think it's been probably the most irresponsible actions I've seen by anybody in politics, and frankly, in business. I'm not sure Mr. Musk is even going to last at his companies anymore if you see Tesla stock going down much more. The fact that he's not overseeing what he's paid to oversee and instead is wreaking havoc in the government doesn't bode well. And here's the I don't want to get nitty gritty, but the idea of, as they start to send out RIFs or firings, or they try to decrease the 8% workforce, do you count the people who have already been fired as part of that, who may be coming back? I'm sure the Trump administration will appeal this. this is, I know I sound like a broken record, but the fact that we have to rely upon the courts, because Republicans are quietly saying things, I hear about Republican congressmen picking up the phone and trying to call the Doge bros to, hey, say, can you not hit my installation? To me, that sounds like graft and corruption in one form or another. It's not the way America's always operated. I guess then I shouldn't be that surprised in light of the fact that Trump turned the White House lawn into a Tesla shopping lot the same day that Musk committed another $100 million to Trump. I mean, I guess, when is this going to get folks who supported President Trump to say no mas, to say this is enough? And I would like to give you the certainty. I'd like to give the folks at the fort certainty. I can't at this point. The only thing I can give you, Bill, and I got, I love what's happening in Petersburg in terms of trying to create the biocluster. I did have the CEO over Norquist in, who bought the Boehringer Ingelheim plant from the Koreans recently. I think they are very committed to making major investments there. And if we combine that with the Flow project and Optica RX, and as long as the money that we've had already that came from some of the earlier projects under the Biden administration, I have great hopes for Richmond, Petersburg, being at BioCenter. We've got to keep working on it, but that whole BioCenter, the private sector companies will still invest, but we still are going to need the kind of R&D that goes into the research at VCU, that some of the research activities that would take place in Petersburg. If all that's up for grabs, then that project. But Novo Norquist, I have a huge commitment that they are there in Petersburg and going to be there to stay, and that's good news for the community. I wish I could give the same assurance to the folks at the fort.
Senator, our next question is Jason Miller with the Federal News Network.
Hey, thanks. Hey, Senator, appreciate the time. The question I have is relates back to your discussions with government contractors. With everything that's going on, the uncertainty, the reviewing of the consulting contract, other efforts to reduce contracting, you mentioned you met with some of our government contractors. What are you saying to them? What are you hearing from them? And then my other piece of this is, have you talked to or met with Governor Youngkin or any other governor? Because obviously the trickle-down effect of this, I've heard just recently a major contractor is laying off hundreds of people already. Whether it's not related to the shutdown or not, it's hard to say. But this could be the first, obviously, of many. Just give me a sense.
Yeah, sure.
What the contracting community is telling you.
Well, let me start with the second question first. I mean, I talk to Governor Youngkin pretty regularly. We've not talked in a couple of weeks. We may have a disagreement about. I think the loss of these federal workers and contractors is huge to Virginia. I think their skills. It's not going to be all that easy to have them replaced. The contractor community that I've met with are frankly astonished, because I think they were excited about the idea that, I think about DOD. There are so many smart things we could do on DOD contracting. We could kind of cut back on regulations, try to give program managers more authority on the contracts, trying to make sure you could actually have loser pay if you have a contract dispute, make sure that we have more fixed price contract. We could actually save money and make our defense industry, intel industry more efficient. We've seen none of that. And we have seen, I hope to be able to bring this forward as I get the documentation, where contractors who have done the work, already spent the money, are being told they're not going to get paid. Well, I call that fraud or illegality. I want to make sure I get the documentation, but I think the contractor community is terrified. But if they don't raise their voice, if they simply stay silent and say, well, gosh, maybe we can just ride this out, that would be a recipe for disaster. We need to be equipped with the information, to whether to give the folks who bring lawsuits or to try to bring pressure. You can't say on one, particularly in the defense area, well, we want to make our nation stronger, and then cut without reason the DOD workforce or the very critical roles that a lot of the contractors play.
Senator, our next question is Scott Lynn with WMAL. Scott? Okay, we're going to move on to Karina Garcia with Wavy News.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for taking my question today. So I was going to ask, because Virginia is facing a growing teacher shortage, particularly in elementary education and special education, and with the Department of Education seeing those cuts, is there any specific policies or federal funding initiatives that can help recruit and retain qualified teachers in the state of Virginia?
Well, there were a number, back when I was governor, of recruitment tools I used to bring in good teachers. And frankly, to also try to reverse the trend where we had some of our most talented teachers go into our toughest schools, and then after they got a couple years experience, they'd then get lured away by suburban schools. We actually had a program to try to get teachers back into the most challenging schools. More recently, a lot of those programs are state, they're not federal driven. But with this kind of chainsaw taken to the Department of Education, I think they said they're going to shut it all down overnight. Who is going to actually say, well, I still want to go into teaching if I'm not sure my loan forgiveness program, which is a great recruitment tool into teaching, is actually going to be honored, because they may not like the fact that I'm a history teacher or literature teacher, because I might not be teaching. They want to teach one side of history and not the whole history, good, bad, and ugly of our country. You've already seen what happens in terms of student loan programs. You take that all out of the Department of Education. Where does it land? So I think this teacher shortage, with these ill thought through policies, I fear will get worse. Now, let me be quick to add that the Department of Education, they had too many regulations. There were a whole lot of things you could do to make this more efficient. Frankly, we should be doing more on loan forgiveness, for example, for teachers. But instead, to simply come in to get a political headline that we shut down a cabinet secretary, and what message does it send to kids or to the rest of the world that the United States of America has decided that education is not an important enough topic to be a cabinet level office? It's kind of wacky. We live in a knowledge-based economy. Everybody says that. Our workforce, our businesses are crying out for more trained workers, and instead you've got somebody on a political quest to get a headline to shut down a department. They could have come in and reformed it. That would have been fine. But to just shut it down, I think it's going to add to uncertainty. I think it's going to make people concerned about the programs that give loan forgiveness if you teach a number of years. I think it's going to screw up an already screwed up student loan program. And at the end of the day, when you also look at some of our Title I schools who get a larger percentage of federal funds, I think those funds haven't all been cut yet, but you got to have administrators to make sure the funds go the right place. So this is I don't get it. It's sure not an effort to build a more prosperous, more learned workforce.
Senator, our next question is Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. About a year ago, you wrote a letter to a Danville resident named Jennifer Williams, better known as the Book Lady. And as you may recall, she's on a mission to give away 1 million books. Currently, she's really close to 160,000.
Wow.
And later today, she's hosting a family literacy night event at the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research, which promotes reading together and exploring all the fun that can bring. I wondered if you could talk a little about why it's important to you to recognize and commend the efforts of Virginians like Jennifer when it comes to educating children, not only at school, but as a community as well.
Well, Amy, thank you. I'm so way down on CR and non-CR and what's going on with chaos. And, the story of Jennifer, what a great project to take on. And, I think about the Advanced Learning Research Institute in Danville, which I was proud to start when I was governor. That, is a great institute for higher education, but also the idea of literacy. I am hugely supportive of her and these kind of efforts. Who say, I see a challenge, I see a problem. Jennifer did, and she said, I'm not going to wait for anybody else. I'm going to try to throw myself into this and solve it on her own. I give her highest commendations, but it does also, I should just end right there, Amy, if I would. But I think about the Ashley, the person who I brought to the State of the Union a week or so ago, who was a educator in Stafford County. Her life dream had been to become a park ranger because she was obsessed with history, and spent years, volunteering. And at like age 39 or 41, she became a park ranger. Got stellar reviews. Took a cut in salary to do this, and then on Valentine's Day got arbitrarily fired, even though she'd had stellar reviews. So whether it's Jennifer down in Danville or Ashley up in Fredericksburg, we ought to support people who are living out their dreams, particularly when that living out their dreams is in a means of cutting back. Jennifer, I think, is going to still be able to continue. Ashley's now a cancer survivor, no health care, no income, and she's already said that the Fredericksburg community is starting to see a decline. The local shops are seeing a decline in business because the Fredericksburg Battlefield, which is a great tourist attraction, is seeing cutbacks because of the cuts to the park rangers. That's, we're a better state and a better country than that.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thanks, everybody. Hang in.